You know how to hold it all together, but when it comes to your relationships, something's always missing. Welcome to Emotionally Wealthy, a podcast for high achievers who are ready to trade emotional disconnection for clarity, fulfillment, and relationships that are nourishing, not draining. I'm your host, Karen Conlon, licensed therapist, transformational coach, and your guide in turning insight into action. Are you ready for it? Let's do this. Welcome to another episode of the Emotionally Wealthy podcast. I'm Karen Conlon, your host. And today we're going to be talking about a topic that is sometimes controversial, oftentimes painful, and all of the time difficult to address. I'm talking about relationships, family dynamics, when one, two, both parties recognize that something in the dynamic is no longer working. And some of us have to make the decision to stay or fix it or go. I know that this has been a topic that recently has been very controversial on social media. You have had a lot of people speaking out about whether family should always come first. And then there's also a camp that really says, listen, your family, just because they're your blood family, doesn't mean that they're good for you and doesn't mean that you should stick around if they're hurting you. So I thought it would be an important topic to discuss today and bring it up here so that we can look at some of the dynamics and maybe hopefully you walk away with some things to reflect on, some things to think about, and some choices or actions to take. Now, if you are tuning in today and to this particular episode, it's quite probable that either you are a parent of an adult child, or maybe you are the adult child, or perhaps you know someone who might benefit from hearing what we're going to talk about. Either way, regardless of what your role is, you know that something in your family system is not working anymore. And it doesn't have to be in a dramatic way either, or even impulsive way, but rather this could be something that you've noticed in a quiet way, in a way that's been compounding or accumulating. And perhaps you've tolerated it, you've tolerated the dynamics, you've tolerated the things that make you feel bad about yourself, not enough, responsible for things that maybe you don't feel that you should be responsible for. In any case, you have found a way of explaining it all, perhaps, or you've told yourself that, well, look, that's just how families are. And at some point, however, something has shifted. Something inside you said, maybe this is not how families are. Maybe this is not the way it's supposed to be all of the time. You perhaps stopped asking, how do I make this better? Because maybe that was part of the way that you coped with this situation, is by constantly asking yourself, how do I make it better? And instead of asking how you make it better, maybe you started asking, how long can I keep living like this? This episode today is for you, the person standing in that exact space. You are the person that's no longer in denial, but you're not quite sure what comes next. And you are probably caught somewhere in between recognition of the situation and decision. You're also probably stuck somewhere between loyalty to family members and expectations and your self-protection. You might even be stuck between the hope for repair and the reality of what has been and what has actually shown up and what has shown itself to be true. Today, we are not rushing to answers. And instead, we are talking about what acceptance actually means and why recognition alone does not necessarily bring clarity. And we're also going to be talking about what choices become available when you stop fighting reality and start responding to it instead. The first idea that I want to bring to the forefront is that just because you recognize something doesn't mean that you know what to do or what direction to take. Awareness, self-awareness, and awareness of the situation, acknowledgement, is merely a doorway. So it's like if you enter a maze, let's say, and let's just pretend that that maze had a door to it. Okay, so now you've opened the door and you have a way in, but you don't necessarily know what direction to take to get you to the other side of it. And awareness is also not a roadmap, right? Awareness is just what it is. It's a recognition. It's knowing something is wrong, but knowing that something is wrong doesn't necessarily tell you what to do about it. As a matter of fact, you're probably sitting a lot more of your time in a space of ambivalence, being ambivalent, just kind of maybe vacillating back and forth between what to do, what not to do, or maybe not wanting to do anything. That type of ambivalence is a very normal response to, the loss of, or the potential loss of, a relationship that is important to you, or even the conflict that comes along with changing or even rupturing that attachment that you have to that relationship. And recognition, also awareness, also comes with discomfort. But I will tell you something about discomfort. Discomfort is often a signal that comes along before clarity. And so discomfort is a way that your body, your mind and body let you know that something's up here. There's something here that needs to be addressed. There is something here to look at. And it is a step or two or three before clarity. So discomfort is basically maybe the first thing that you see after you open that door of awareness, right? There's discomfort in not knowing what to do, but here you are. Now, the other part of this is your nervous system and the part that it plays when you are making this type of decision. When we are involved in relationships that are chronically stressful to us, and by chronically stressful, what I mean is that every time, for example, that you are with that particular family member, you notice that maybe, man, your heart starts racing, or you feel a tightness happening in your chest, or your stomach knots up. These are stress signs or stress signals that your body gives you. They are emotional safety violations, if you will. So these are not weaknesses. And I will tell you, if you are in a relationship with someone, with a parent where, or a child where you are, constantly feeling this way, it's not a weakness. It is your stress response. It is your body telling you that there's something that doesn't feel emotionally safe here. And tolerance, just like anything else, tolerance has its limits. Even when love is present, the fact that there is love, the fact that you love this person, and that there's nothing in the world that you wouldn't do for them, does not mean that you also have limitless tolerance. Your body for sure does not have limitless tolerance, and it will absolutely let you know. And it's one of the reasons why it's so important to be sure to constantly practice your mind and body connection, and really be aware of the signals that your body's giving you about the environment, or about your interactions about a particular person. Because when the body says no, not only do you feel it, but the mind also eventually follows. A lot of times we're just in our heads intellectualizing or rationalizing what's happening, or maybe we're just minimizing or normalizing. Oh, that's just how they are. They've always been that way. And in that way, not only are we enabling behaviors that are potentially not good for us, we're also denying ourselves the fact that we have some feelings, and that our body is giving us some stress response about these feelings and about the situation or the particular person. And ignoring these signals that your body is giving you, by the way, also will prolong the confusion that you have around this relationship, that ambivalence that you have around the relationship. Your body is usually the first one to give off signals about a situation, because a lot of times, like I said before, are our minds are kind of in the space of trying to figure things out and rationalize and intellectualize what's happening in front of us, because at the end of the day, we really want things to work out, don't we? Most of us, I think, have the ideal relationship and what that looks like, a parent child relationship, and we oftentimes maybe idealize not just the relationship but the person. And when the person isn't exactly who you want them to be, or maybe not even close, then acknowledging that is sometimes a little bit harder to do, because it's also um, a sign to you that you may have to do something about that. And that's really uncomfortable and sometimes doesn't even feel safe, because there's all kinds of fears around being abandoned or rejected by other family members, for even acknowledging this. So that leads us into needing to go into reflection. And when we engage in reflection, self reflection specifically, that type of reflection requires honesty without self protection. And what I mean by that is that it requires you letting go of the story that everyone experienced the past in the same way. This is particularly true when you have two or more siblings. And there is the idea that, oh, from the parents' perspective, well, we raised everyone, the same way. We gave them all the same upbringing and the same disciplines and the same values. But the reality is, parents, if you're a parent here, is that you are raising very different humans. And while your strategies and tools and values might be conveyed the same by you, you are still dealing with different children who have different personalities. And as they grow older, they're also developing their own sense of self, their own sense of autonomy, and the values and thoughts and ideas that may not be in alignment with yours. And so it's really important that you let go of that story, right? That everybody is experiencing you in the same way. And the same goes for the adult child as well. It's really important that, especially for siblings, if you have siblings, that you let go of that narrative that you told yourself, oh, our parents were the same with us, or, my experience was that they were great, or my experience was that they were awful, because each one of you is a different individual, and you experience those parents or that parental alignment or attunement very differently. In some cases, you may all agree that yes, we received the same type of treatment and we experienced the same household. But in most cases, you will have siblings that have differing stories and different perceptions of the same household and the same people. So that is a really important part of being able to reflect on and be able to accept the fact that your narrative and your perception is not necessarily the same as others. The other thing, too, is that when you're reflecting on this, it's really important that you recognize where hope may be something that you're using as a strategy to protect you from grief. When we look at the history of how someone behaves, I always use this example of putting it on a pie chart. If we put someone's behavior on a pie chart and we look at the fact that, okay, well, 95% of the time they are dismissive of me and they don't listen to me, and maybe it's all about them. And then 5% is representative of that person's behavior or being the way that I really, my gosh, want them to be. That is the person that I love, has all these beautiful qualities and attributes that makes me feel incredibly special. So if you're looking at it, let's say from a pie chart's perspective, and you are constantly just holding on to that little sliver, that little 5%, well, that might be something that you're using. That might be a strategy, a defense strategy that you're using in order to protect you from grief. And what grief am I talking about? I'm talking about the grief of accepting or looking at things for what they are and for a person as who they are. Because once you really step out of that little 5% hope and look at the other parts and the 95%, it forces you to really come to terms with the fact that that 5% that you've been holding on to with all your hopes and dreams is only a sliver. It's not really who they are. It's the exception to the rule. And your emotional truth in relation to that is that it's painful and that it hurts you and that you're disappointed. And so part of this reflection is not just thinking about what's happened and how I'm feeling. It's really being able to decipher between this is the fact about their behavior, this is how I'm interpreting these behaviors, and this is my emotional truth about how that behavior is impacting me. There's also the idea that we have to accept, even though we have tried, or even though we are doing our best and putting our best foot forward, that nothing's changed. That despite our best efforts, there is no change. And why is that? Well, you may have heard this before. People don't change unless they want to. You can't change someone just because you are trying to set boundaries for other people or for them, right? Or because you've asked them to. I mean, sure, they might change, they might make some changes, but if they make changes, it's important for you to accept that that's because they want to and not because you really have any true power over them. And by the way, I'm not talking about coercion. I'm not talking about situations where there's emotional manipulation. I'm talking about relationships where you have two people that are on level playing field and where there's an ability to change, but there's no change happening. Now, speaking a little bit more in terms of what acceptance means with regards to a relationship like this one, right? A parent adult child relationship. I want to say a little bit more about acceptance. Acceptance is, in this case, does not mean approval or agreement. I want to be really clear about that because there are certain terms that when they are said, there's this immediate correlation with what that's supposed to mean. Acceptance, in my experience, is one of those terms that people typically say, oh, acceptance, that means I have to take it. And I'm here to tell you, no, that's not what we're talking about here. Acceptance does not mean that you approve or that you agree with a behavior. What it does mean, however, is that you're seeing the relationship as it is for what it is, not as it could be, not as you want it to be, not as you've dreamed it should be, but rather as it is. And when you experience true acceptance, it does allow you to choose instead of engaging in some kind of emotional bargaining. When you accept a person for who they are and really see them clearly, you now have choice. You can say, okay, you know what? If I want to have a relationship with this person, I think I'm going to have a conversation because I love them, but there are some things that I can no longer be a part of or tolerate. Or you might choose to say, well, yeah, I am fully accepting that this is how they are and who they are. And in order for me to stay in this relationship, I I have to shut up about it and stay quiet. I may not like it, but it's more important to me that I have this relationship and, this is the price that I have to pay, right? And so that is what I mean when I say that when you experience acceptance, It is about you knowing that you now have a choice and you don't have to emotionally bargain with yourself about like, should I take this? Should I not take this? No, you can actually make a decision, a very intentional decision about what you want to do or how you want to address it or whether you want to do anything about it at all. Acceptance, folks, is the foundation for agency, the agency that you have over yourself and your choices. What I'd like to do now is kind of flip it over to you and ask you for a moment to do some reflecting of your own. Think about a particular relationship that you're in, and I want you to really reflect on where are you right now? Where are you right now in that relationship? Are you in the recognition phase where you're kind of recognizing that something's off, that you're not feeling all that great, or that you're not feeling good at all? Are you recognizing that the dynamics no longer serve you, and maybe the dynamics no longer serve them either? Are you in that stage? Perhaps, however, you are in the reflection stage and you are now starting to think about how it is that you feel. You're tapping into your body. You're listening to the signals that your body is telling you, even when you just think about calling that person or those people, right? What is it that your body is telling you? Are you feeling warm and fuzzy? Are you looking forward to it? Does it make you feel at peace or relaxed? Or are you feeling like, okay, I got to get ready for this phone call? I got to go take some deep breaths and, just relax, get myself situated, and almost preparing yourself, armoring yourself, if you will, to have this conversation with this person. Or perhaps you're in the acceptance phase where, like I said before, you are accepting that this is the person that they are, this is who they are, this is how they are. I'm not quite sure what to do with it, but I have accepted that I can't change them. And this is who it is that I am dealing with and need to make a decision about, which brings me to that last stage, which is choice. Are you in that choice stage where you are trying to make a decision whether you fix it, you stay, you go, you address it, you don't address it? Think about how long you have been sitting with that something has to change stance, if that is where you are. Some of you will say, I've been sitting in that stage for a month. Some of you will say for the last year. Some of you will say, I've been sitting in that stage for the majority of my life. And as you think about how long you've been sitting with that something has to change, I want to encourage you to also now think about what feels harder to accept. Is it harder to accept their limitations? Is it harder to accept your grief or potential grief over the loss of the relationship or the idea of that relationship? Or is it harder to accept the fact that you deserve to be and feel emotionally safe? Think about that. What feels harder? Because all of those things are potential considerations, and all of those things can feel hard. I want you to also think about, are you holding on to hope? Are you holding on to hope because change feels more frightening than pain? I mean, I really think about that. And there's no right or wrong here. This is not a weakness or deficit in you if that's where you are. This is just an exercise in reflection about where you are emotionally in that relationship without judgment. And the other thing that I would invite you to reflect on is, are you focused on controlling the outcomes or the relationship instead of clarifying what it is that you need? Sometimes we try to control the outcomes through things like people pleasing, even if it's to our own detriment. or just constantly trying to make sure that everybody else is okay, or we want to try to make sure that people do not get upset, or if they are upset, you want to try to fix it. So when you're focused on trying to control the outcomes of a relationship or the dynamics of a relationship, what you're not focusing on is your own needs. And you are abandoning yourself on so many levels. So I really want you to take a moment to think about what you are actually focused on and how that's manifesting itself. Because again, trying to control an outcome does not have to be an aggressive act. It can be a very passive act, or it can be a very active act, but not necessarily an aggressive one. So some key things that I wanted to just kind of summarize from the things that I just said here. Number one is that acceptance is not agreeing or approving, and it's also not giving up. Acceptance is just seeing things clearly for what they are. Healing also does not require reconciliation to begin. So you don't necessarily need to be in alignment or in agreement with the other person that you're having conflict with or about in order to start healing. Healing begins when you start to focus on your needs and even acknowledging that you have needs or thoughts or emotions about a certain thing. That is a form of healing. This is not about the other person. This is about you looking into yourself and starting to heal the relationship that you have with yourself. The other thing is that you can love someone and still choose distance. This is a hard one because when you come to acceptance and recognition and you say to yourself, well, this just cannot be. I can't be in this relationship anymore. That's not necessarily true. You can love someone and not like them so much all the time. And you can put a little buffer called distance between you. It could be something like, well, if you're used to calling every day, um, then maybe you start calling once every other day or once every 2 days. That doesn't mean that the person is going to like it. People typically like to know what to expect. They typically like to know that you are playing your part and they're playing theirs. And this is how we interact. So when you start changing things around, people don't typically love that. And so you might get a little pushback. You might get a little bit of guilt peppered in there. But if distance is what you need and want, and you don't want to end the relationship, and fixing it seems difficult or impossible because maybe the other person is not willing to or can't, for whatever reason, engage in a conversation and come to some kind of agreement and acceptance, then, choosing a little bit of distance is okay and it's healthy because you're protecting your energy. And by the way, you're also protecting the relationship by doing that. The other thing is that change starts with reality, not negotiation. And I know that that seems counterintuitive because you might be thinking to yourself, well, wait a minute. Then if I want to fix a relationship, doesn't it take some negotiation, right? Some give and take. And that is true. But what I'm talking about here is the bargaining, the excuses that you make with yourself, the justifications of the behavior that you make with yourself about the person's behavior that actually is actually hurting you. And so that's the type of reality that I'm talking about that cannot be negotiated. Because once you start negotiating yourself, you're entering into the realm of gaslighting yourself, dismissing yourself, and really telling yourself that your feelings aren't valid. And the last thing I wanted to mention about that is that peace, that internal peace that you get from all of these things that I'm talking about, it often comes with releasing expectations and not trying to fix other people. So This one is hard too, because there comes a point, and this is part of acceptance too, where you have to just kind of say, well, what if I were to let go of those expectations? What would happen if you just allowed yourself to release those expectations and see what happens when you're not trying to fix them or trying to have them fit into your box? It's really liberating. I mean, that's the only and best word that I can describe to you as to what happens when you release the expectations and stop trying to fix people. When you have family estrangement, family estrangement is not something that happens right away. Like, you don't try to do those things once and all of a sudden, oh, that's it. We're not talking to each other. We're estranged. No, family estrangement typically happens after there's been just really long term relational strain. It doesn't come from a single incident. It's just like when you are with in a relationship with someone, and let's say a romantic relationship. Typically, you don't break up after the first argument or disagreement. So you don't make a decision to divorce because you've had one or two arguments. It's not a single incident. This is stuff that's chronic, and there's strain on the relationship for a really long time. Sometimes the strain is mutual for both. Sometimes it's very much one sided. And under those situations, when or if you want to have some kind of reconciliation, it really requires some sustained behavioral changes. Having insight is very important, and being able to apologize and take accountability is another very, very important part of the equation. But in reality, the thing that's really going to sustain a reconciliation is behavioral change, either from one part or both parts. But that is the key, is being able to do that. Because once you have long-term sustained behavioral changes, what happens is that you also start feeling psychologically and emotionally safe in that relationship. And in order for you to repair a relationship or be in a relationship that is going through a repair, you have to feel emotionally and psychologically safe. I mean, it is the lack of emotional and psychological safety that got you here in the first place. It's not just insight and apology and reflection and all the things that we've been talking about. It is all of that plus sustained and long-term consistent behavioral change. The other thing that's really important is, and I find that this is really hard for people, is validation or validating that the other person has a different experience than you. And by the way, it is completely okay and to say, I didn't have that experience. We're not saying that now you have to agree and say, well, yeah, I guess you're right. What I'm saying is that there is an opportunity for you to say, I I didn't have that same experience, but I am sorry that you had a different experience, and I wish I would have known. I wish I would have understood more that you were feeling this way. You don't have to agree. You don't have to say, yeah, that is true. But if you want that person to feel psychologically and emotionally safe with you, or vice versa, that needs to happen. You need to be able to say and accept and acknowledge that, yeah, maybe they had a different relationship and a different experience with that same person. And I think the other thing too that's really important in mentioning here is that, look, despite your best efforts, there are some relationships that will remain harmful, that will require so much of your energy in order to sustain them that they may not be worth it. That's a decision that only you can make, of course. that is also a reality that we have to look at as being one of the options here. Now, let's say that you are in the stage where you are ready to take action or make choices. Let's talk about some of the things that you can do to help guide you to make those choices or take some actions. The first thing I would say to you is name your truth very clearly. Be very clear about this. Really being able to say to yourself, this is not sustainable. This relationship, the way it is, we cannot continue, right? Because when you can acknowledge that, it actually reduces your internal conflict. When you are sitting in ambiguity and in ambivalence, your nervous system stays on high alert. Think about it this way. Imagine that you're trying to balance yourself in the middle you're of a seesaw, trying to not fall off, and you're trying to do that by trying to make it balance and keeping it steady. Well, that's kind of what happens to your nervous system when you are ambivalent and ambiguous about a relationship that you're trying to manage, because at that point you're not relating, you're not in the relationship, you're merely trying to manage it, just like you're trying to manage not falling off that seesaw. So naming your truth, even if just to yourself, about the relationship really helps to reduce that internal conflict. The other thing I would say is you want to try to separate your fears from what you desire. And very simply put, fear is going to ask you, what if you lose everything? Or you're going to be saying to yourself, what if I lose everything by taking action or making this choice? Whereas desire is going to have you ask yourself, what's going to allow me to live with integrity and with peace? Are you coming from a place of fear where you are paralyzed about taking action because you are afraid of losing everything, right? Relationships, getting rejected, all of that. Or can you come from a place of desire, which gives you a lot more openness? It opens up your mind to more creative solutions, because now you're saying to yourself, what allows me? And in saying that, you're also saying, I am allowing myself. And then you can fill in the blank there. So that's another really important space for you to consider. Clarifying boundaries before conversations. Boundaries are for you, they are not for other people. Boundaries are what we use as an internal compass or roadmap to let us know if something or someone has crossed the line. So if you can clarify what those boundaries are for yourself about that other person or about another, family dynamic or situation, then those same boundaries are the guiding lights for you that are going to help you define what you are going to participate in and what you're not going to participate in. You don't have to tell anybody else, I'm doing this, I'm doing that because of my boundaries. No, this is an internal conversation that you can have with yourself. Boundaries are not explanations and they're not ultimatums. You're just saying, no, when this happens, I'm not engaging or I'm not participating. When this person says this, makes a comment about that person or makes a comment about me, that's a boundary that's being crossed for me internally. So clarify those boundaries before you have any conversations, because those are going to be your guiding lights to where you want to go with this. These are really important decisions. They do impact you. They do impact other people. They do impact your life. These aren't the types of decisions that you want to make in a situation where you feel pressured or there's a sense of urgency, like it's now or never. Absolutely not. What you really want to do is start taking the time to reflect. Start taking the time to think about how you're feeling. Start taking the time to check in with your body, check in with your emotional health, with your psychological health, and do things in steps. You don't have to resolve this today. You don't even have to resolve it tomorrow. Maybe in some cases, if the relationship is very harmful to you and you recognize that and you know it, then maybe you work a little bit quicker. But generally speaking, in my experience, this takes time, and you can expect to do a lot of back and forth. Like, yes, I've made a decision, and then sometimes you kind of cave back in. So please be compassionate with yourself. Have some grace for yourself, because that is going to happen. And that is why I really invite you and encourage you to just start thinking, just start reflecting. Please don't force yourself to make decisions, because you don't have to. This is about you learning and knowing that you have choice. And this is your path towards deciding what it is that you want and how you want to feel. And recognition and awareness opens the door to that. It brings understanding, acceptance, and grounds you in reality. And having choice restores your sense of agency, that you have choice and agency over yourself and over your life. And again, remember, you don't need to decide everything today. You don't need to decide anything today. So as you move forward, I'm going to invite you to just ask yourself, what truth am I ready to honor right now? And what step can I take, even if it's just a small one, that's going to move me towards feeling more emotionally safe, more grounded, and more at peace with myself? Because peace begins when reality is no longer something that you fight, and instead it's something that you respond to. Thank you so much for being here today, for showing up for yourself. If this episode resonates with you, if it gave you some insight, or if you know someone that could really benefit from hearing it, please go ahead and share it. I am so happy that you're here. I am honored and privileged to do this for you every day. I want to invite you to the next episode. And until then, stay curious, stay connected, and stay emotionally wealthy. See you next time.
Oh, hey, quick reminder for you that this podcast is for informational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional advice, diagnoses, or treatment. Always consult a qualified professional with any questions you might have.